Our next real storyteller, not that they're fake storytellers, Mark Peugh.
All righty, 1976. Nation's bicentennial, and everybody was pretty absorbed in that except for me. This was my first summer out of high school, and I was bored. So I called my best friend Dan, and I said, how are we going to fill the weekend? And we decided hiking would be a good idea. We made our way from Prescott up to Sedona. We were going to hike down to the Verde Valley. We figured that'd kill the weekend. Took us a day. We got down there late afternoon, and were greeted at Clarkdale by a horrendous monsoon. I mean, a real frog choker, and we were soaked all the way through. We had absolutely no opportunity for shelter. Not sure what we were going to do. Dan said that he had an aunt that lived nearby, so we dropped a dime. When was the last time you guys got to say that? Auntie came by, she grabbed us, took us back, fed us, dried out all our stuff. It was all good. The next morning we woke up and she said that she needed a trip to Los Angeles and she hated to drive alone. Would we mind going with her? So we threw our backpacks in, away we went. We got to LA and Dan says, I have a sister in San Francisco. Grabbed our backpacks, we jumped out on the freeway, and the first little introduction we got to California was the California Highway Patrol. And they detained us for some hours on the side of the freeway. They looked through every pouch, every pocket, every crevice that you could look through, except the one that had our party favors in. And when he finally got frustrated, he let us go. And very quickly we got a ride with what I would have to call the proverbial California hippie bus. I had no idea what that was until then. But I can tell you, as an 18-year-old boy, everything of interest to me was in that bus. It was a nice trip. We got out, and I stood there thinking to myself, my perspective is changing a little bit here. We were happy, and we were high. Turns out that Dan's sisters both were a couple years older than us. They didn't have a lot of time for a couple of teenage boys in San Francisco. So I had a great idea, and I said, I have a sister in Louisville, Kentucky. So we grabbed our backpacks, and off we went. We make our way back to Prescott. Again, another run-in with Chips out in the desert. The street people in Barstow were quite an adventure. But we get back to Prescott and we took inventory. We had started that trip with 24 cents. We now had 26 cents. I have no idea how that happened, but we restocked, we took off. Anybody that finds himself hitchhiking, don't go through Flagstaff. I will tell you that we stayed there for a long time. Flagstaff is not a fun place to hitchhike out of, but we did make it out of there. I had a brother that was in the Army in Colorado. There's an Army base up there. Anybody remember? Fort Carson, I think it is. And he snuck us into the barracks. We spent the night there. The next day, he takes us up, drops us off at I-70, and very shortly we get a ride from a stocky, bald, well-inked gentleman who gave us a ride literally all the way across the state of Kansas. Nice enough guy. It was a little odd. He was stopping every 100 miles. We didn't quite figure that out. But we get to Kansas City. It's late, middle of the night, and he says, look, I got a 2-hour stop I'm going to make. I'm coming back through. If you guys are still here, I can get you all the way to St. Louis. So we did, he did, and we were on our way. And we finally got the nerve to ask him, why every 100 miles? Turns out he had just been released from prison. He had to check in with his probation officer every 100 miles. So clearly he didn't kill us or worse. So we get to St. Louis. I didn't have any idea how dangerous St. Louis was, but it was. The guy that picked us up had an ice chest full of Coors beer. Now, in 1976, Coors, west of the Mississippi, was a real treat. And he gave us carte blanche. So he kept pointing out spots in St. Louis that were dangerous. Just last weekend, people got shot at that overpass, la-da-da-da-da. He made it his mission to get us all the way through St. Louis into a safe location within striking distance of my sister's house. And we called her, and she came out and grabbed us. And, of course, we were hungry, and we were drunk. So that's how we got started there. And after a couple of weeks, it dawned on my sister that we were probably hungrier than she wanted to deal with. And she told us that we needed to get a job. Well, we looked, and there wasn't a lot of jobs. We didn't have any experience, anything of that nature. But there was one job in the paper that said, "Will train." Fred Astaire Dance Studio. And I'm thinking to myself, I had rhythm, okay? How tough can this be? I can dance, right? I was thinking cheek to cheek. They were thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, cha-cha-cha. I had no idea what that was all about, but I was a quick learner. They gave me some intense training for a couple of weeks, and they decided, we don't need you in Louisville, Kentucky. We need you in Toledo, Ohio. And I said, well, okay. I said, I've got a traveling mate. We'll discuss it. They said, if he's up for it, we'll train him. We'll fly you both up. So we did. Okay, we both arrived in Toledo, Ohio, very hungover. And I will tell you that there were two things that became quite obvious to me about the dance business, at least this particular studio. I might qualify that. It ran on two things: sales and sex. And it did. And sales were high pressure and script oriented. You were memorizing these scripts and you were running these scripts on these, innocent clients and that sort of thing. And as far as the sex is concerned, that might be another talk that I'll give, or if anybody really needs to know the November issue 1978 of Forum, you can read all about it there. But my first student was Barbara Vanderhorst. And like I say, I was hungover. I had 2 weeks worth of instruction, and I get thrown out on the floor with her. And she is just the nicest, meekest, kindest woman. She was the widow of a farmer. I have no idea how long she'd been a widow. But she had more knowledge about dancing than I did. She's been doing this for a while. And she could recognize these scripts with the first paragraph. And she'd stop, hold her finger up, and she'd just say, "Can we just dance? And then you just tell me how many hours you want me to buy." Now dance lessons were $65 an hour in 1976, and they paid me $4.50. So there's a little bit of a markup as far as that's concerned. So the months go on. I'm learning how to dance a little better, and I'm paying attention to the clientele and such. And there was one particular client. She wasn't my student, but her name was Mrs. Shibish. We all called her Peugh, because when you saw it spelled out with the P's and the Y's and the S's and the Z's, and that's what it looked like. But Mrs. Shibish was about my height. She had raven black hair. She was built just like Dolly Parton. And I can tell you that if she would have asked, there was very little that I wouldn't have done for her. I think she sensed that because she approached me and she said, Mark, she says, I've got a daughter and I'd like for you to teach her how to dance. Okay, pick me. I'm your guy. And a couple of days later, Peugh shows up with her daughter, and let me paint this picture for you, okay? Corrine is early teens, painfully shy, thin as a toothpick, straight dishwater, blonde hair, stares only at the floor, okay? But when she did occasionally glance up, she had these super thick glasses, okay? And when you caught her eyes just right, those lenses magnified those green eyes, and she looked alien. I mean, it was weird. It just was, So I've taken the job, right? So I get her out on the dance floor, and she has no rhythm. She has no timing. She has no nothing. And I'm thinking it's probably because she's really, self-conscious. All right, there's other people trying to learn how to dance out there on the floor and the like. So I decided to take her back in the private room for instruction. And I go ahead and turn on the music. And I said, Corrine, this whole dancing thing is only moving while music is playing. Okay? And I said, and as far as looking silly or being self-conscious, Okay, that's all in your head. And to prove it, the music's going, and I start just hopping around the room, and I'm doing stupid things. I'm flailing my arms, I'm bobbing my head, I'm messing my hair up. I'm doing anything that I can do that would make me look silly. And I said, by definition, I'm dancing. Okay? And before long, I get her hopping around a little bit. Okay? And she's getting relaxed. Okay? And ultimately, I walk over and I grab her two hands. All right? And we start hopping together. All right? And then it dawns on her that we're actually doing this in time with the music. And the lights come on a little bit. Okay, she smiles, and now I'm starting to move into some dance moves. Now we can do a little rock step and maybe cha-cha, back and forth, little 1, 2, 3 waltz. She's catching on pretty good. A couple of weeks of that go by, and we find out that there's a dance competition happening in Cleveland, Ohio. And it would be our studio against the dreaded Arthur Murray. Quite a little bit of competition between the two studios, I was to find out. And Mrs. Shibish approaches me and she says, I'd like you to take my daughter to the dance competition. So I get busy teaching her a routine. Miss Shibish gets busy making these costumes, and these are gaudy costumes. I mean, the costumes is the only way to describe it. They're black velvet. I got a red silk shirt on with just big, poofy white lace. You don't even want to visualize what I look like. It was embarrassing. But we go up as a team, and we've all got our little corner. And one by one, they call our numbers, and one by one, we compete. And I'm nervous. This is Corrine. Okay, this is the toothpick. I don't know what to expect. Don't have any idea. But it's our turn. They call our number. We come out. The spotlight it comes on, and we start our routine. And at the beginning, Corrine is predictably stiff. Okay? We get, about halfway into it, and she's loosening up. And then we get to the end of this routine, and she is a regular Ginger Rogers. Something happened to her. She just came alive all of a sudden. And we get to the end of the routine, and I spin her out for her presentation curtsy. All right? And when she does, the whole crowd just erupts. And I look at this girl, okay, and she's having her curtsy, and she's lost every curl in her hair, okay? There's little beads of perspiration on her face, and she turns around and she looks at me, and those big green eyes just flash at me, and they're just sparkling. And there is this smile that's just plastered across her face. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking to myself, along with her first place, Corrine's got a new perspective. And so did I. Thank you.
That's a fun story. The first time I heard that when they were in auditions, and the very first thing I thought of afterwards was a song by Jackson Browne. What was it? The Dancer. And there's a line in the song from that goes something like this: between the time you arrive and the time you leave, you go, is the reason you're alive, but you'll never know. And that's what that story reminded me of. You just never know the people that you run into, the impact you're going to have on their life. So just amazing. Anyways, Mark enjoys quiet nights with his honey. Other leisurely activities, this is leisurely stuff, reading, writing, and traveling. When he's in the great outdoors, he spends time RVing, camping, rafting, and riding his ATV. Mark is a survivor of cancer and also a survivor of being raised in a cult. And those are other stories. He's had 2 wives, but his greatest challenge of all, and hardest of all, is just being Mark. So.